running away. I feel like I'm running towards something. It's like I'm being called.
Hey everybody, I'm Mark Duplass. I'm here at the Indiewire office in New York to record the Filmmaker Toolkit podcast. Thanks for watching.
So, Penelope came out of experience watching TV with your family during the pandemic?
That was a part of it, yeah. We were watching this really cool sort of, I call it the low-rent survivor, the low-rent Canadian survivor. It's a show called Alone on the History Channel, and they drop you off in the woods with very few survival items, and you just see what you can do and how long you can last. And I think that what was exciting to me was like my children were riveted by it. My parents were riveted, like all of us. And as anyone who has a family knows, finding any television that you can agree upon, you get to some serious lowest common denominator programming very, very quickly. And I was shocked that this seemed very specific and it was working. So that stuck with me. And it was during the pandemic. And I just had this like weird vision of like a 16-year-old girl living on her own in the woods. And what I've learned, listen, you don't learn that many lessons in this life as an artist, but like one thing that has occurred to me, I'll say, is that when I try to create projects from an intellectual perspective, like this would be cool, or this was very popular, so I should maybe make something like this or a little different, it's a recipe for disaster. But when I just trust whatever that little lightning bolt that comes into my body is, I tend to do well for whatever reason. So I had no specific reason to be voicing a 16-year-old girl who wanted to leave her life behind, but I did. And that's kind of how Penelope was born.
Because part of this is also, Penelope is someone that leaves behind social media. She's kind of unplugging in a way that I think people are relating to right now. But I think part of this, and because you've got kids too, is part of it is, I think, how teens are represented on TV too,
That's
right?
A big part of it,
yeah,
yes.
I like Euphoria, but to a certain degree, I feel like there's a certain sense of what teens want or what's cool that doesn't necessarily. My kids are a little younger, so I'm hoping it doesn't jive with them, but I'm guessing it doesn't jive with it.
It's funny to say that because the kids ended up being a really big part of it. My kids were 12 and 8 when I was writing this show.
Mm-hmm.
They're now 16 and 12. And now it feels like it's specifically for them. So I don't know, maybe there was some part of me that was feeling like subconsciously like I wanted to have something for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I like Euphoria too, but I wanted something that felt a little bit more on the wish fulfillment side, a little bit more extreme that could open up a lens as to a different way of living. I've been doing a lot of hiking and backpacking lately, and it just something happens to me when I get out there and there's quiet. And I also love how much are you aware of the Norwegian slow TV movement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So like this for me is like I clearly need to live in Norway. It's like a place where the number one show is either someone stacking firewood or a woman knitting a sweater, and they're duking it out for the number one slot is like where I need to be. I was like, oh, could I take some of those principles, almost TV is relaxation, but also give it some sort of narrative thrust and combine the two. That was a little bit of the Penelope thing, but to your point about the teenagers, I really do feel like there were times when I was watching things almost like a movie like Before Sunrise is kind of like this. It's like they took the element of what the Uriel experience could be and the romance of a night in a city, with a beautiful young boy or girl, and they made it slightly fantastical almost. It's natural in the way it's delivered, but like nobody has that experience really. And I kind of wanted to deliver something like that for like a young girl who's feeling like, I don't feel right. That's the number one thing I get from my nieces and nephews, from my daughters and their friends. They feel like something is off, and I think it has something to do with, yes, of course, there's like nature versus technology, but part of it is just having any moment alone to yourself to just slowly think about something and to spend time like learning a task. Like in this show, we spend tons of time watching her forage, learn to make fire, learn to make shelter, all these kinds of things that I guess I figured out weren't technically TV worthy because I tried to sell this show and nobody bought it.
I want to get into that too.
But I think they're TV worthy.
Before we talk about selling it and also bringing in all the wonderful female collaborators you have in this, there's a scene in the pilot. It's Penelope's first night, and she encounters Sam, the character played by Austin Abrams, who's kind of has his own version of kind of going off and being disconnected. He's playing music, and she makes this joke about why aren't you on Spotify and YouTube? And he has this wonderful thing. And I seem to remember you telling a story during Sundance about, and obviously you brought in some wonderful female collaborators to run with this and get this, but that's a little bit of Mark Duplass' early 20s in Austin,
100%,
right?
100%. Yeah, Sam is me. When I was in my teens through my early 20s, I was not a filmmaker. I used to edit a church television show from 9 p.m. till 7 a.m. in the morning to make money. But I was a musician. Like, that's how I identified. And I would go out on tour. I'd press my own CDs and I'd book my own shows and play to 7 people and sleep in my van. And it was hard. But it was, when I look back, like almost this puritanical monk-like existence. And people were so kind to me. You look back in those situations and the people that I met, when you look at them from an archetypal storytelling perspective, you'd think it was a horror film you're saying. Like, oh God, here it is. He's going back to the trailer park to sleep with the people he just met. He's going to get... And every time it was, well, here's some granola to take with you, and I hope you're okay. And if you ever come through, come stay with me again. It was some version of America that I didn't believe existed anymore. That same version also exists in the backpacking community. You go out there and you're up there, and the first thing when you meet someone up there is, do you have enough food? Do you have enough water? Are you okay? Oh, I lost one of my steaks. Oh, here, have one of my steaks. It's just anathema to the world as I know it. So I wanted to put a little bit of that in Penelope, and I certainly knew that character. And I actually had an experience like when I was like 22 and I was on tour. And I met a girl up there who stayed with me for like 5 days in my van. And I eventually got her back to the airport and helped her get back to Germany. And it was nothing romantic. It was nothing sexual or anything like that. It was just she needed a place to crash and I needed a little companionship. And I wanted to show a world in which when a young 16-year-old girl goes into the van with the musician she met, it actually can go another way, and not in an irresponsible way, because there is something lightly fantastical about Penelope. You know, there's almost just a touch of a fable to it, but hopefully leaves us with a sense of, you know, maybe there are elements of our lives that could be this way, and that there are good people out there.
Yeah. And I think before she goes into the woods, having that kind of interaction, I think is an important kind of like portal into it, right? Like I don't know that you want to just walk her into it. I do want to talk more about the show, but you know, one thing that's fascinating me is because for a while now, Duplass Brother Productions has, and I think in a lot of ways, I think about Girls and Lena Dunham. I feel like you and Jay were kind of really ahead on where the indie filmmakers could fit in the TV space. Togetherness, Room 104, you know, all the good stuff. And I think, if I'm remembering right, you guys didn't you have the first when they called it Red Envelope deal? Their first like
we were
Netflix.
One of the first streaming titles with a puffy chair.
Yeah,
you know, and we're getting offers from some traditional companies, and then you know, Roadside Attraction said, you know, we're thinking about partnering with Netflix. I'm like, isn't that the DVD company? Like,
yeah,
really? You know, of course. There we go.
But I mean, finding a space. You know, because they are still very much projects that feel like you and Jay, you know, and an extension of it and finding a place in it. And not that these were runaway hits, but again, like in the indie films, you found the space for it.
I found my little corner of the sandbox. Yeah.
I'm very curious then, because yes, Penelope is its own thing, but like the experience of bringing that out, this story that we're talking about, was different for you, right? That it was different in terms of the response.
It was, yeah. You know, the industry changes constantly, and I think we could have our own 3-hour podcast and discussion about that. But what I will say, and this is a little bit reductive, but mostly true, is that I have been able to carve out a little niche for myself. If I make things at a certain budget level, keep them cheaply enough, I can get people to give me money, and they look at us like a little lottery ticket. You know what? If it blows up, great. If not, it'll bring in some good viewers. It's going to be well reviewed. The Duplass brothers will go around the festivals and ambassador for us and talk about them at Sundance, and everybody wins, and we all felt good about that for a long time. And when the pandemic hit and everything shut down, and I think that people started to take stock, and when I say people, I mean the business and the streamers, they started to realize, oh my God, we need to make a shift. This is not a sustainable model. And Penelope was really the first time where I felt I had, even though I knew I was trying to do something specific, a little bit more slower paced, a little bit more meditative. It still was a YA show, an adventure show in a lot of ways. And I really thought when I brought all 8 scripts out that I wrote on spec that there was going to be a bidding war. I really believed it. And everybody passed. They passed with now if you want to rewrite this, maybe Penelope can talk to animals. Maybe that's what she does. Maybe we make that show, They were all looking for that little more of a clear lane that could make it an easier yes from their bosses. And that was an ego hit for me, for sure. I was like, oh, shit. Like, I thought I was past this point in my career, and I thought I had earned the right to be able to do something like this. So it kind of sent me into a little bit of an existential spin.
Because one thing I just want to establish here, Penelope still is following that model because there's a lot of production value here, but it's a small cast, it's a small crew. You're still able to make a television show, and they're 24 minutes roughly.
Right.
It's like
this is not your the cheapest TV they make out there is like $3 million an episode, and it's still at a fraction of the cost of that. But it's bigger than making $100,000 movie like the one I love, which I could take to Sundance and do really well with back in the day.
But the idea that they would want this is because it is, again, it's low cost, low risk.
That's what I always believed in, and Room 104 is such a perfect model of that. That was it was low cost for them. And they were so happy to have it. We were able to make it at a profit and share that with our collaborators. It was just really, really excellent. So that forced me to think of things in a new way. But the truth is, that shakes me up for about a week. But then I get excited. What is going to be my way around this or through this? And you mentioned us coming to TV in the first place with, a generation like Lena and whatnot. That was a calculated move on our part because back in the day, it used to be you make a movie at Sundance, you graduate from Sundance, then Fox Searchlight and Focus Features comes to get you, and you go make Little Miss Sunshine and you win an Oscar. That was the run, right? But that business dried up when we got there. And I saw a lot of my filmmaking peers just banging their head against that wall that they thought was the place they belonged and really frustrating themselves. And I looked over and TV wanted us there, and so we went there and we found a really great home. But I also noticed that Togetherness and Room 104, they weren't going to do the things that Girls was going to do. They weren't quite lighting it up in that way, So that immediately taught me that, well, if I can find a way to make this, financially a little bit more cheaply, I think I'll have sustainability, which is why I thought Penelope would work. And then that didn't work. So then I have to shift again. And this is when I really had to circle up with Mel, who runs our company, and Jay, and say, are we willing to, risk our shirts and self-finance this thing? And I waffled on it for a little bit. We thought about bringing in some independent financial partners, but ultimately I just felt strongly I wanted to just triple down on our values and really go for it. And that was at once to protect it creatively, because I wanted us to be able to do exactly how we wanted to do it. But also there's a part of me that loves the gamesmanship of this business, and I kind of wanted to gamble, and I kind of wanted to see what we could do and try and, this is like, I guess this is big level thinking, but like, I would like to see a whole ecosystem spring up around this idea of the streamers are reducing the interesting television that they're making. They know that it can work, hence Baby Reindeer sweeping the Emmys in the limited category. No stars, really interesting, small budgeted storytelling. But their development system is just not built for that. They almost can't get out of the straitjacket. So my belief is that by making a Penelope on my own and bringing it to them and showing it to them fully made, that we'll have a chance to not only continue the great creative tradition of that interesting middle of television, which is honestly an endangered species, but like, I think it could be like a whole fun thing where there are TV festivals springing up everywhere, and like just like an ecosystem for indie film was birthed in the 90s, we could see that here for TV. I really believe that.
I've never been, but people really enjoy Seriesfest out in Denver.
It's great. It's great. And again, it's not quite there. ATX Fest in Austin is doing this too. There are tons of places, but what they're missing right now is a market that the buyers will come because they know if they're not there like they are at Sundance, they're going to be missing out on this incredibly independently made stuff that could be their next flagship thing and their next awards thing. And they get into a frenzy and they overspend on it. And it's a wonderful thing for everybody. And so that's the thing I want to march us towards, and I want to wrap my arms around a bunch of people and be like, let's go make this thing.
I promise we will get to this, but I have to ask because, I saw this at Sundance and now I've gotten to see all 8. What did you learn in the process? I mean, obviously this is going to be on Netflix on the 27th. Yeah. What did you learn in that process of bringing one of these? Because then I think you also brought some more pilots out at South by as well.
Yeah.
And there was an announcement about Creep Tapes, which I think is following the same model to some degree, right?
It is, yes. We've done quite a few things like this.
You got into this after this one you did.
I really into it, yeah. And, it wasn't like I just came up with this idea like 3 or 4 years ago when I started writing Penelope. To a certain degree, Room 104 was very similar to this model.
I love that one because it was a thing where here's the container.
Yes.
Come on in and
work within limits.
And it was a great way for people to break into TV and for you to help mentor people in. But it was also this wonderful device of like, we'll come into 104. There's always going to be something funky there.
It was so much. I wish I could make that show forever. I was never more probably happy as a person overall from a creative standpoint, from being able to mentor people. Sometimes, there was a writer director and I could just give them the room. Just like, go do whatever you want. Sometimes I would write something specifically for a new director and give them their first HBO credit. Then they'd go off and have these huge careers. I mean, it was so cool. But, not to get too into the weeds, but what was different about that model is that, I sold that show ahead of time to HBO based upon the script.
Right,
so
right.
They were really cash flowing the show. So I didn't have to risk, I didn't have to Coppola it basically. And the same was similar for Animals. I'd made a few episodes independently, our animated show there, and then they cash flowed it from there. So this is a little bit different, but I just felt the need to do this because this stuff is not going to be made unless someone takes a big risk. And I also enjoy the risk. So we have a bunch of things that we've done. Creep Tapes is another one that's, an extension of the Creep movies I made for Netflix. I really wanted to make those independently because those shows are so bonkers. I just want to be able to do exactly what I want creatively. So we took those out. Those will be on AMC Plus and Shudder in November. And then we've got Penelope coming on Netflix on September 24th. And I think, we have a few others that we made that are all of different budget levels. I directed a documentary series about a musician named Riley Walker, who I've loved for years, who's dealt with a lot of addiction, a lot of mental health issues. And I just find that, like me, who was a musician who had an existential crisis and realized this thing I'm obsessed with, it might destroy me. There's no money to be had here. And if I stay here, I may not make it out alive. And I had to leave. And that was brutal for me. And Riley's trying to stay in there. So he meets with a different musician every episode and they try to write a song together and they talk about their relationship to music. And it's funny and slow and strange and inspired by shows like Painting with John and How To with John Wilson, and then we made a show that, I kind of call like the post-apocalyptic Broad City called The Broadcast. That's 2 of my favorite female like theater clown creators, so you've got Coco Paruso and Natalie Palomides, and it's a show about the last remaining broadcast, the only remaining broadcast, and it's just balls out clown comedy. And it's so fun for me because I don't know how to do that well, but what I do know how to do is, build them a ship, like you said with Room 104, where we make it for the right price, we give them full creative control. Hopefully we take it out and sell it. And, just being totally candid, what I'm experiencing right now is there's one thing I consistently hear from people, whether they're the buyers when I'm bringing them things, or whether they're my friends in this industry watching me do it with bated breath to see if they want to jump in. It's, I think you are a year too early. This is what I keep hearing, which is basically everyone's going to turn around next year and say, we stopped making things, we stopped buying things. Oh my God, we have no content. It's time to go.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of banking on that.
Mhm.
And because I finance them myself, I can hold them and I can wait until the right buyer comes along, you know? But that's a real feeling I have. And I think one of the hurdles we have to get over is, it was done in the film business, is, are you a development executive or are you a buyer of content? Okay. When indie films started coming out, the development executives didn't want to go buy those because it meant that their job was obsolete. Right. And in TV, there are only development executives and there aren't really acquisition executives. Once we eradicate that nomenclature and they become the same thing and they realize they're just as valuable to Ted Sarandos and Casey Bloys if they bought it off the street at Seriesfest or ATX, or if they developed it internally, it doesn't matter. You got it into their hands and you got it on the channel. Once that's validated, I think that's going to be the linchpin.
I feel like we should give some context here. You've worked with a lot of directors and brought up. Mel is not just another. Mel is the woman. No. Mel has run Duplass Productions for a while.
Yes.
I think you and Jay have referred to her as the Duplass sister, although she's not. And she's done projects on it, but like this was something. Part of Penelope was also. Obviously, Mel's a huge part of your world, but this was her coming on and helping writing all the scripts with you, but then also going to direct them all, which is a little bit insane. 8 episodes, but
it's a little bit insane. She had to run the company at the same time, and we've all decided that was probably a little bit extreme. But you know, from my perspective, it was the easiest call in the world because you know, Mel is such a strong creative producer. She's been in it with all the movies we produced, and in some cases, you know, as all creative producers do, doing some backseat directing and creative shepherding. So I knew she had this in her. And after we made Biosphere together, of course I knew that. And where else am I going to get a director that experienced and that good who's willing to work for scale and back end on a TV show?
But also because understands the model, understands
the model, you know. And nobody has more crew dedicated to them than Mel, who want to support her and want to see her win. So all of that was obvious. The surprising part and the fun part for me is, you know, there are people you know really, really well for a long time, but then there are these weird like gaps in knowledge that you have about them because Mel and I are always talking about movies and we're always talking about TV shows and things. We never really talked about how much we both are obsessed with nature and our histories with nature. Hers is more from her childhood. Mine is more, I started in my late 30s. And so when I brought this to her, I was like, I don't know how you're going to, and she was like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm obsessed with this. And then in my mind, I was like, oh, right, all those books in her library. Oh, right. Like it all kind of came together in this like little M. Night kind of moment. And so, yeah, it was a very organic fit. And I think that for me, I knew how to write these scripts in a way that made sense for the 16-year-old girl inside of me. But we really needed Mel and in a lot of ways, Megan Stott, our lead actor, to try and voice these things in a way that felt real, you know, from a female perspective, because it is different, obviously, heading out into the woods. And yeah, it was just like, it was a dream. And if we get to make a season 2, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to do this in a way that allows Mel to run a company, direct some, and also have a life.
I feel like in watching all 8 back to back in the last few days, and this seems like such a mundane thing to say, but it really is this thing that I take away from it is being up in Washington, which is an area that I don't know Mel's from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And being in the forest in Washington, I've been in the forest before, I've been out west before, but there's just something, it photographs beautifully, but there's just something about that landscape in this story that is quite special.
My experience, something happens when you've spent about 36 to 48 hours in the woods, and not just Washington, in any woods for me. And I think part of our goal with this show is a little bit of immersion for the audience members, you know. A great day hike is great, but when you slowly, over the course of time, spend more and more time there, something starts to happen and something starts to shift. And again, that's why the show is deliberately paced a little bit more slowly and is asking more of audiences, asking more of younger audiences in particular than TikTok has prepared them for. So frankly, I'm anxious about how that's going to go. But for me, what I want out of this show is like, is it possible that like I created something that families could watch together? I've never really done that before. I think the closest thing was maybe like Safety Not Guaranteed, which is really an Amblin movie inside of an indie box, you know? And you know, my daughters and my wife and I, my parents, we struggle to find things that we can share, you know. But I'm hopeful that this is something that you know, I think parents will discover and bring to their kids or vice versa.
One choice, and this might also sound really mundane, but I actually think this is fairly significant. We don't spend a lot of time with her family or get a sense of it, but she's not running away. They seem like loving family. It seems like, I mean, again, you're only on the periphery, but it feels like, oh, they're on a camping trip. It seems like a lovely kind of Northwestern family. You know, it's like this is more of a calling than it is, because I feel like a lot of these, like when you get with a kid in the woods or kid, you know, leaving the family, there's that idea of an orphan or that idea that you're separated. The sense that she's being called or that this is something that she wants to do is, I think, really important for this one.
Yes, it is. And I think that what I really wanted for people to be able to connect to in Penelope is the lack of a significant, identifiable, intellectual reason to do this. And it's something I identify with deeply as an artist. And we talked about this at the beginning of our conversation, is trusting your gut and trusting your instincts. It's taken me so many years to do that because I'm just taught to use my head. My whole life I've been taught to use my head. But Penelope's in a case where things are good. Her life's good. Her life's fine. She's got everything she needs. But something in her, and she says this early on, something doesn't feel right, and she doesn't know how to explain it. And that can be many things for people. That could be, you know, manifesting in the form of a mental health. That could be just manifesting in the form of, it's only been like 70,000 years since we stopped being hunter-gatherers, and now we're told to like look at our phones all day long, and it's just, our bodies are revolting is what I believe, and they don't understand why we're not going and picking berries. It feels weird, and some people are fine with that and they have enough skill set or scheduling, and some people are haunted by it. And I'm not saying that the solution is like just go out and get in the woods. But I wanted to have a show that added some dignity to the inner life of a 16-year-old girl. And I don't want to be reductive about this by any means, but I think that a lot of the representation on television of teenagers, because it works really well for drama, you know, is petulance and fussiness, but a deep existential feeling of being unsettled, and not taking that out necessarily in the ways that I see on television was something I wanted to be able to represent. My conversations with my kids are different than I thought they were going to be. I thought it was going to be, you have a teenager and they scream at you and they slam the door and they don't want to talk to you. My kids talk to me about how hard it is being them. They feel lost. They feel like the world isn't holding the possibility for them that it was supposed to hold, or that it was told for me by the boomers. And they're feeling really confused and really, they're looking for something to stand on. And I think that in some ways, without knowing it, I was reaching to find something in that in Penelope.
You've mentioned a couple times the pacing.
Yeah.
And there's a few episodes where she runs into people, but there are whole episodes where it's like, it's a task in the woods, you know, and I think the length of these things are perfect, Mark. But I'm very curious about how you, Mel, and the team approached pacing in the edit, because there is, and again, it does that sense of feedback, because you know what it's like when you're in the editing room. You lose all perspective very quickly of how something is playing. So I'm wondering how you all, when you're cutting this thing, finding that rhythm and finding what's going to work here, because you're not always cutting for story. You know, you're cutting for more of a vibe, something spiritual. the plot
Yes.
could literally be, is she going to build this fire,
That's so interesting you say that, because I'm going to basically go ahead and sound like I'm contradicting everything I just said about trusting my instinct, but I do not trust my instinct with pacing. I do when we're putting it together in that first assemble and that rough cut, and you feel that, and it's like making music. But then I think at a certain point it does become a more empirical, intellectual process, and for us, you just got to test it on people. That's what I've learned. It's what I did for almost every Room 104 episode. We would bring a batch of episodes into our office. We'd set up 20, 25 chairs, get some pizzas, ask a filmmaker we knew to bring someone who wasn't a filmmaker, and get their feedback. And it's really, really helpful. Sometimes you don't even need to read it. Sometimes you need to feel it in the room. But particularly with a show like Penelope, which, is deliberately challenging people's notions of pacing. We had to be careful how far we pushed that. But it was surprising to us in a good way how much, once we had set the tone of what we wanted to do, people got on board for it. And we learned something else, which I learned when I was making my movie Blue Jay with Sarah Paulson, which was, about 85% of the audience was there and they were giving us good notes, and about 15% of the audience was really asking for Blue Jay to be a 9-minute short film, And I was like, well, I'm never going to please you. You're gone. But the ones who are somewhat amenable to this, I can listen to that. And we had a little bit of that with Penelope. I think there will be people who will say, this is not for me, and that's totally okay.
It feels, the reason I asked, because it feels like with television for this type of thing, you needed that screening like experience. What you're describing is something very similar that for movies go through, is like, how am I going to be carried through a 90-minute, hour, 120-minute narrative? And I think one of the things that's really frightening about television is that and it's almost the topic of your film, is that we've entered this thing where what we're measuring is the attention span. And and if something could be second screen, like, it scares the shit out of me. Netflix makes a lot of good stuff, but it scares the shit out of me when I hear filmmakers talk about, I got a note that my show isn't second screen enough.
That's right.
And
100%.
so that idea that you needed to do something like this, I think, is really important. If we're going to start having television that asks a little bit more,
yes, And here's the good news of that. I agree with everything you just said, but here's the good news in this. Great television doesn't have to be eat your vegetables television. The marker of what the streamers in particular are saying needs to be done to be successful is so extreme and so chasing just where the puck is. And so, we need a dead body in the first 30 seconds. We need this. That actually, if you just back off halfway from that, you're still in incredibly unique television that will be rewarding and can last for the years. And that's all we have to get to. And the other good news is there are markers in the marketplace and in the awards circuit that tell us that these shows can and do work. And even a show like The Bear, which had no real sitcom stars and was kind of against the grain of what was happening, it really hit for people. Again, Baby Reindeer, it really hit. So while I'm not having a ton of success just yet, quoting that to the executives and getting them to buy my shows, clearly I had to go make Penelope independently. I actually believe that time is on our side with this, because I think that audiences are going to start to rebel a little bit from the monotony and quite frankly, just the homogenous nature of what they're being fed. That's not every place, but from some places, And I think they're going to realize that it's good business to make cheaply made, interesting stories. We can make 10 of these for the cost to make one of these international shows, and one of them is going to break out and be that big Emmy winner. They're going to start to see that from a business standpoint, not just it's good for the culture, which they should do, but they won't. But they will respond to the business, and it's there.
And I don't want to go too much into you've been very generous in talking about the business, and it's not really the point of this podcast, but I had to ask one thing about, because there's one part when reading about what you're doing with Netflix that I didn't 100% understand. You were saying that this is a low risk thing. And I'm trying to, and I guess what we're really saying is like, put it on the platform, see what you get at it. This isn't something that you've had to make some huge deal for. And I guess my question is, and I don't want you to give away, secret here, but considering how they are you going to have a sense of because you want this feedback too. You want to know how that's going to be. With that idea that it's going to be low risk, are you going to be able to get a sense of how this is doing on their platform?
Yeah, I will. I have a good relationship with Netflix, and we're in discussions about how to define success in order to make, more episodes if we feel like it works. And to be clear, I have lots of good relationships around town, and
I have to imagine HBO loves this stuff. I mean,
everybody has the different things that they offer, right? And what I felt strongly about with Netflix for this show was not only the reach, which I really, really wanted. I believe this show can play to the middle of the country like a lot of my shows haven't. But I think secondarily, there's a lot of discussion about the Netflix algorithm, and of course, as we know, nothing is empirically bad or empirically good. But for a show like Penelope, that is a relatively small show that I don't even think it's responsible for if someone came to me and said, we're going to make this our flagship show, we should be promoting the shit out of it. Like, I would be worried they would lose money on it, and it gives us a smaller chance to break out in season 2 if it doesn't hit. The one place in town you can trust the cream rising to the top of that promotion is Netflix because of that algorithm. So I actually felt most confident dropping this thing on Netflix. We're doing it just in the US only, and we retain the rights to the rest of the world. And the hope is that if it hits here, then I can then take it around and sell it piece by piece around the world. And not to get too into the weeds again with the business, but that essentially makes our show uncancelable because I won't have just one primary boss who owns everything. I will be the boss, and I will have 10 places that want to distribute it. And let's say 7 of them only come back next year and want to do a season. Great. I'll just do it with those, and I'll find other buyers around. It's a lot more work, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful. Congratulations on it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate it.